19-year-old Sammy is working the cash register at the grocery store in his hometown 5 miles from the beach. 3 teenage girls walk in wearing swimsuits, and Sammy watches them as he continues to ring up customers. The girls arrive at Sammy's lane to buy their jar of herring snacks, and Sammy watches admiringly as one of the girls withdraws money from between her breasts. He takes the bill reverently as ENGL, the store manager, reprimands the girls for coming in barefoot in just their bathing suits. Sammy feels protective of the girls and quits his job in protest of his boss embarrassing them. This is another first-person story, and it's narrated straightforwardly with a chronology that just goes one direction. The first-person narrator is speaking to you. So there's a reference to you several times in the story. Look at page 831, 3/4 of the way down the page. You never know for sure how girls' minds work. Do you really think it's a mind in there, or just a little buzz like a bee in a glass jar? But you got the idea. He is narrating his story very informally to a listener. He's trying to sound more knowing than he actually is when he talks about how pretty the girl is who has her straps down around her shoulders. He says at the top of page 832, this clean, bare plane of the top of her chest down from the shoulder bones, like a dented sheet of metal tilted in the light. So telling someone that the top of a woman's chest looks like a dented sheet of metal tilted in the light. Maybe it sounds more than pretty, but it doesn't sound like he's knowing or experienced. When she reaches in between her breasts for the dollar bill on page 833, the only thing that Sammy can think of to say about that is, really, I thought that was so cute. A question that arises when you think about the dramatic situation of Sammy telling his story to someone is, how far in the past is this story? He just turned 19 earlier that year. On page 833, now here comes the sad part of the story. At least my family says it's sad, but I don't think it's so sad myself. He's not telling this story that happened earlier today because his family has already had time to hear the story and process it and pass judgment on it. In the very last sentence of the story, he's saying, my heart kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter. So hereafter is a very grown-up word, but like some of the rest of this language, it sounds like he's trying to sound smarter than he actually is. To me, the first-person narrator of A and P sounds a little bit closer to the actual age in the story, 19, than the narrator of Age of Faith sounds. Age of Faith's narrator sounds older than the 12-year-old girl that she's telling us about. There is only one setting in this story, the grocery store. But this whole story is influenced by an offstage setting, if you will. So Sammy is excited because these girls come into the A&P wearing just swimsuits. He's saying you can see them better in the light of the grocery store than you can see them on the beach, because with the glare nobody can really see anyone very well. And ENGL also has the beach on his mind when he says, girls, this isn't the beach. So the implication is that the setting makes this story, because they are out of their appropriate setting given how they're dressed. The themes in this story are really interesting, and they kind of counter each other. One of them is chivalry. Sammy fits into a long tradition of men who, in literature or in the movies, make heroic sacrifices as worshipful homage to the women, the beautiful women that they adore. Sammy quits his job because his boss has called these girls on the inappropriateness of what they're wearing, and he wants them to admire him for doing that. He feels like he really doesn't want to work for someone who could treat this beautiful girl in this way. So farther down he says, remembering how he made that pretty girl blush makes me so scrunchy inside that I punch the no sale tab and the machine whirls and the drawer splats out. So he's not able to make much of a heroic gesture. His costly sacrifice for the beautiful woman he adores is rather comically carried out, but it's very heartfelt all the same. So you've got this chivalric gesture, as if he's a knight in shining armor. But on the other hand, you've got misogyny as part of his character too. So on page 831, there's that line that I read earlier about how girls' minds work. Maybe girls don't even have a mind. And then on 832, he's talking about the women who go to his grocery store in a very disrespectful way. At the middle of the page, he says the sheep pushing their carts in the aisle were pretty hilarious. You could see them when Queenie's white shoulders dawned on them, kind of jerk or hop or hiccup. And then also on page 832, at the end of that paragraph, he calls some of the shoppers a few house slaves in pin curlers, which I would hate to think anyone would talk about anyone that way. On page 831, he talks about the woman whose purchases he's ringing up. She gives me a little snort in passing. If she'd been born at the right time, they would have burned her over in Salem. So he's thinking about Salem, Massachusetts, where they burned the witches in 1692. And then at the very end, even after he's made his chivalric gesture, our Sammy is looking for his girls, feeling protective, but he doesn't like women in general any better. There wasn't anybody, last paragraph, but some young married screaming with her children about some candy they didn't get. This woman with her young children is not worthy of respect that you think a chivalrous young man would extend to all women. She's just dismissively evoked as a comic book figure.